Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem.
Any Yiddish speakers with us today? I know there are two here.
Not me.
A small one there. Thank you very much, Yoram, for inviting me. It's a big covet, größer covet, to be here with you today. I will be talking about Yiddish revival in San Diego and beyond San Diego. But before I touch upon this topic, let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Jana Mazurkiewicz Meisarosh. Very long name.
You said that 10 times?
Nobody will know how to pronounce it anyways, so let's just skip the name. I'm a Polish transplant to San Diego, and I came here in 2017, and that's when I started the Yiddish Arts and Academics Association of North America. So before I talk about Yiddish revival, because I talk about Yiddish revival and why we should care about Yiddish whatsoever, maybe let me briefly talk about the history of Yiddish, very briefly, because I know some of you are familiar, so not to hack the Chinik, so to say. Yiddish was born around 9th or 10th century in that region on the border between Germany and France. And that region is called Alsace. At the beginning, it was based mostly on Middle Hochdeutsch, so Middle High German, but it also, from the get-go, had these elements of Hebrew, Aramaic, and also completely forgotten, extinct French dialect, French Jewish dialect, Laas. Did anybody hear about Laas? But some of you probably know Chulent, the word Chulent.
Yes.
It's one of the oldest words in Yiddish whatsoever. It comes from the Laas dialect. Too long, hook long, very long. And so that word everybody knows is the oldest one. Almost, well, scholars say, one of the oldest words in Yiddish. So it used, of course, still uses Hebrew alphabet, which is vocalized, except for Hebrew words, because Hebrew words are considered so holy, they don't get vowels. They are left alone as they would in the Bible. So the oldest, I talked about the oldest word in Yiddish that we know of, and let's quote the oldest sentence in Yiddish that we know of. It comes from the 13th century, and it's a blessing found in the prayer book in Worms. And I'll read it. It doesn't sound like contemporary Yiddish. Gut Tag im Betrage, se verdis machser in Beschachne se strage. So literary translation would be, blessed shall be the one who respectfully carries a prayer book. But if we say word by word, it would be, give him a good day, the one who carries the prayer book with great respect. So then you'll ask, why did Yiddish acquire all these Slavic elements? Żabę, kaczkę, paskudniak, some of you might know these words. And so it happens because of lots of reasons. The first reason is Geschäft. So, of course, primary occupation of Jews is to make trade, and they go all around the world to trade. So they go also to Eastern Europe. The other reason is the Crusades. Of course, it also creates all sorts of adventures and going around the world. But the biggest reason is the Black Death that comes in 14th century to Germany. A lot of people die, Gentiles die, and Jews, for some reason, don't die. Is it magic? Is it protection from above? Not really. It's the cleansing rituals. It's washing hands. But Gentiles, of course, don't buy this, and they think that Jews poison the wells. And there's a huge wave of Jews going to Poland, and they stay there for centuries. That's why Yiddish has also these Slavic elements. They travel east, they stay there for centuries, as we know. So why is Yiddish called a Mamaloshen? Because it was the language of mothers. There were two Jewish languages, Hebrew and Yiddish. Yiddish was the one that was not as holy as Hebrew, so it could be used for every day. Washing dishes, we talk Yiddish. Cursing your neighbor, you can't use Hebrew, it's not holy. It's a holy language, Hebrew, so you use Yiddish. And women did not study Torah. They didn't necessarily know Hebrew. So that was the language of mothers. That was the language of women. And this is reflected in literature. So in literature, we see there are two types of books for women. First one, Cenerene, that was the religious literature. The first page, when you open Ceneren and other books, you see the description says, this is a book for women and for men who are like women. I will leave the interpretation to you, what it means. But that was at the beginning of Yiddish literature the case in most books. And so religious books, Ceneren, they describe rituals, they tell women how to pray, what to do in the household, how to bless the candles, and they have translated fragments of Torah. But there is another kind of literature, secular. So as you know, in Germany, in Poland, in France, women used to read in Renaissance period romances with knights fighting dragons to get the hand of the princess. And that was exactly Yiddish literature too, except everything was Yiddishized. So the princess's name was Malke or Golde, and the prince's name was Moshe, Chaim. And then at the end, when he finally fought the dragon, they would not go to the church, they would go to shul. So this is what women would also, I told you.
It's a good thing.
This is what also women would read. And then what happens? Yiddish gets all this bad rap. It's a language of the street. It is called bad German. It's called jargon, vulgar language. So it is like that for a long time until early 20th century, the end of 19th century, 20th century, when the era of nationalisms come and everybody gets infected, right? This is actually when Germany gets created, because we're talking about Germany. There is no Germany, there are kingdoms. So everybody gets infected with this disease. So nation, what is a nation? What does it mean to be a nation? What does it mean? What's my language? So Jews ask, what is my language? Is it Hebrew? Is it Yiddish? And there are discussions all over the Pale of Settlement, all over the Yiddish land. What is our language? So there is this conference in 1908 that gathers people all over, from all over the place. Chernobyl, yes. And they argue, they discuss, should Yiddish win, so should Hebrew win, and what wins? Yiddish, because of numbers. So the masses speak Yiddish. Only privileged people, people who have time to study Torah, they study Torah in Hebrew. So Yiddish wins in Chernobyl. And from that on, you have this golden era of Yiddish, publishing, theater, music, movies. Everything flourishes, as we know, until Holocaust comes. And then, of course, we all know why Yiddish now is an extinct language. The first reason is the Holocaust. I don't have to even talk about it, everybody knows. But there are other reasons. So in America, Holocaust didn't really touch America. So why would Yiddish become extinct in America? That's because of Americanization. So you can imagine people from Eastern Europe coming here, not knowing English, not having any chances really. They really tried to become Americanized as much as possible. And they were told by their mishpoche to throw all this Yiddish, all this past life in the ocean. And it's a metaphor. Actually, suitcases went to the ocean with the language, with the culture, with the old world's mentality. And this is why Yiddish stopped being spoken. I'm generalizing, of course there were pockets here and there, but it was not that popular. And then we have Israel, also not touched by Holocaust. There was no Israel, right? But here you also have to be a new man, a sabre, because Yiddish mentality, Yiddish culture with this non-fighting attitude wouldn't really fit the country of Israel that is surrounded by enemies. You have to fight all the time. So Yiddish was passé, didn't really make it there. But what happens, I have to mention, I was talking about this kind of Yiddish Renaissance in Eastern Europe in the 20s, in the 30s. What happens is Yiddish becomes a respected language, so there are first attempts of writing textbooks, writing dictionaries. There is a big institution that came to being in Yerushalayim, der Lite, as called the Jerusalem of Lithuania, in Vilnius. That was the capital, scholarly capital of Yiddish of the world. And in 1925, this big institute called YIVO starts to emerges there. And that institute, they write textbooks, they write they write all sorts of dictionaries and all sorts of scholarly literature in Yiddish about Yiddish. Now, in 1940, the Nazis noticed the institute. And now what do? There is a fascinating story how all of these documents people try to rescue them. And how do they do it? It's amazing. They call themselves a papier brigade, a paper brigade, because they hide, pregnant women would take, the papers here, hide them. And lots of these papers ended up in New York. They moved the institute to Manhattan, when it is nowadays. And lots of these papers survived the war because of these papier brigade people, and now they can be found in New York. So after the war, the New Yorkers got excited that they finally have this institute. They have the Yiddish Hochme there, right in front of their nose. And that's how Yiddish scholars got created, contemporary Yiddish scholars, because they have these opportunities, they have these sources right there. So they had children and they had grandchildren. Lots of them lived in the Bronx. So there were few families of these scholars living in the Bronx, very poor people, as you can imagine, new immigrants. They called their area where they lived Bembridgeovka. It's on Bainbridge Avenue in the Bronx, so they called it Bembridgeovka.
What?
Bembridgeovka. And that was very smart because the kids would play together and they would infect other kids with Yiddish. And that's how the first Yiddishists came to be. So they wouldn't speak Yiddish because they had to, because they grew up with it, because that was a language they knew. That was their choice. So these scholars would go, they would visit older people, they would take their notebooks, and they would write down all the words from people who were close to dying. Like, how do we say stroller in Yiddish? How do we say, let's say, water bottle in Yiddish? They would write it all down, and now Yivo has this much of the materials from these older people. And this is how new dictionaries and new books of all sorts come to be. And of course, these early scholars, they have children, as I mentioned, grandchildren. And now I'll read you the list of what their families created. It's a very short list. I could talk and talk, but they created Yiddish courses and Columbia, Harvard, Austin in Texas, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Michigan, Ann Arbor, of California, Berkeley, and Stanford University. They created summer Yiddish programs in New York. They created Yiddish Folk, so that's a very nice initiative, Yiddish Week. This takes place every summer in upstate New York. 1 week you're not supposed to use English at all. Whole week you're only allowed to talk Yiddish. The Workman's Circle, Trip to Yiddish Land. So Trip to Yiddish Land is Workman's Circle in Yiddish initiative. They created Yiddish Farm. When I visited Yiddish Farm, it's a relatively new project. It was kind of ironic because only garlic could grow there. They tried to grow all sorts of things and only garlic and more garlic. It's ridiculous. But they have a Yiddish farm. Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. Yiddishkeit organization. Yiddishkeit is Los Angeles. Plus California and San Francisco. And Yiddish theaters, folks in rap. And new Yiddish podcasts and blah, 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 blah. The list goes and on and on. And only in last 2-3 years, actually, because of all these efforts, the number of Yiddish speakers starts to grow. It's the first time in post-war history when we can say the number is growing. It's just big achievement. So now I mentioned all of these cities, all of these universities, but we are here in San Diego. And what's going on in San Diego? So I know San Diego once upon a time used to be a surfer's village. And nobody really cared too much about, and before the creation of UCSD, there was not much scholarly life here. But now we have UCSD, we have SDSU, we have San Diego University, and I think it's about the time to start Yiddish education here. So because of that, I created the organization, and that's the step number 1, to just start some sort of small organization that can have events in all sorts of parts of San Diego County.
How many years now?
2.5 years.
2.5.
Because I was pregnant when I started, so.
There's no excuse.
Anyways, so it seems only logical that San Diego should have a more serious Yiddish institution. So step number 2 is we only 3 days ago, I think we acquired, 4 days ago, we acquired a small grant to build a cultural center. So within 3 years, we should be able to have our own nonprofit and have our own building, which would be amazing because for now it's homeless, so we're homeless, so we have to ask people to host our events. And you know, I imagined that when we started, maybe we'll have 5-6 Yiddish students, but it was in this room that we started, and you know how many people show up for the first class? 50.
Wow.
50 people. So it's a lot of interest, and
Yeah.
we need better resources to accommodate all of these people.
When was that class? Because that first class you're talking about,
Mhm.
when was that?
Oh, 2.5 years ago, something like that.
Oh, no, okay. Because I grew up, my father spoke Yiddish,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother didn't, but they came to a couple of Yiddish-speaking classes here.
Oh, very
So
nice.
that was before.
Oh, I know, because they had some shmuas, like Kreisel.
Like yeah, they did, but,
Mhm.
and you were born in Poland?
Yes.
Yeah, I hear that. He was-
Yeah, so I was fortunate
But-
because, yeah.
Here,
You
you have a
did-
customer.
Excellent, yes.
My-
And here are my cards, you can reach me that
I'm
way.
just curious very quickly, what part of Poland was it?
The worst part. So I was born in the middle, in Kielce. That's where the last pogrom in history took place. So that place was absolutely horrible, but you know what? It was surrounded by shtetl. So I feel fortunate that I could still see this, because they are disappearing. And here in America, people of my age have no idea what shtetl is. So here we come to step number 3. What could happen possibly after the museum is created? Well, my dream, I'm not sure if it's possible to do, is to recreate a shtetl, at least as a mini shtetl, because that way Americans could understand what it is. It's not a village.
You can
Shtetl-
create something with the House of Israel in Balboa, a small shtetl.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We have to start with the one building, and then if it goes well, we could expand. I can imagine a few Jewish businesses and some goats outside. That
I'll
could
be there
go-
for sure if you have goats.
So hopefully, if everything goes well, it will happen at some point. And I know that people who represent my generation, it's a third generation after the Holocaust, they have more interest than the second generation. Because the second generation, they still had their parents, they still heard Yiddish around. In my generation, we're angry because nobody told us that this word existed. And we want to have more access to it. That's at least my interpretation. I was always angry that nobody passed it to me. That was blocked. The contact was blocked somehow. So yes, my call to action, if you happen to know anybody interested in this project, please spread the news, take the cards. Here is the whole regime, the list of the events, so I can talk briefly about them. I teach the ongoing class Yiddish for Beginners at City University City. My friend Tanya teaches intermediate and advanced speakers, so if you want to reach her, you can email her directly. We have some Yiddish-themed dinners, especially for younger people, to teach them about Yiddish and Yiddishkeit. So this will be in April in San Diego Hillel. Then we have a new class, I'm very excited about it, Yiddish yoga. And I hope to attract people of all ages, including kids, because kids like to play, and I think they would enjoy. And all of these positions can be easily translated into Yiddish. I think it's easy to see.
Cinco de Mayo, that's a Yiddish event.
No, but everything can be Yiddish.
Everything can be, right, absolutely.
So Cinco de Mayo, my friend from New York.
Even Kratzman. I said even Kratzman.
So my friend from Jerusalem/New York comes, and she will be talking in Yiddish with English translation about her father and growing up with Yiddish. And then a big thing, in July we would like to have a big Yiddish festival. And I imagined it would be nice to have a movie festival, but unfortunately it's not for our budget because the copyrights are $500 per movie.
Find sponsors.
Yes,
Yeah.
we want to find sponsors, but for now we're crawling.
That's what. It's
We're not even
beautiful. You're
walking.
doing great. It's amazing.
So I'm not sure if movies will work at this moment, but what can work is we still have Yiddish speakers here in San Diego. So I would like to invite them to talk about their upbringing, about growing up with Yiddish before it's too late. So they will definitely be a part of that festival. And we'll have lots of other activities. If you would like to get our newsletter, you can email me and I will send it to you on a weekly basis, and you will be in touch with our organization.
Very nice. First,
So-
I know there's some question. If we can open the floor to a
Sure,
few Q&A.
absolutely.
Anybody has some question for her that she can answer?
Grüßen Dank.
I wanted to mention on Netflix, they have a whole series of Steisel in
Yes.
Jerusalem, and that's almost all completely Yiddish.
It's beautiful Yiddish.
Shtisel, yeah.
Shtisel,
Very good, yeah.
it's fabulous.
By the way, on behalf of
Steisel.
Partners in Torah, we invite you to come once a month and do a class here every Tuesday.
Sure.
You can do every Tuesday if you want. If you want once a month, every 2 weeks, we'll set up a section for you, a Yiddish section.
Mit
I think we'll be
Vergnügen,
Geschmack,
as they
right?
say. Absolutely, no.
I did not call you Schmuck. It's Geschmack.
Geschmack. Yes.
I have a question. When was Yiddish become a language? Now, Yiddish is a language. It has the language laws and all that. When did that take place?
So, as I explained, for centuries it was called a dialect, and it was a
Dialect,
dialect.
right.
So people argue all the time because Jews like to argue. When did it actually become a language?
Yeah.
And I would think after the conference in Chernobyl in 1908, that's when it became a language, because that's when people realized we have to codify it. We have
And
to
grammar and all those
Exactly.
laws.
precisely, and that was only in that.
Although I must add that there was a lot of literature in Yiddish, like Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Oz,
Yes.
even before that conference. So the conference was just, I would say it was like a celebration of Yiddish more than just the beginning. It was.
Well, it was about, imagine the country of Israel. There was Israel before the country of Israel, right?
Right.
But once the paper was there, yes, now 48, we have a country that changed a lot. And the same with the conference in terms of Yiddish. Also, Stempel. Jo.
They were speaking Yiddish already.
Exactly.
I heard from my great-great-grandparents that they like Krosno.
Very nice.
Precisely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. Thank you.